All right, I'm going to have to ask you to put that buffer down because it's time to get unbuffered. Christopher Mitchell here with the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I'm talking with Doug Dawson, the one, the only, the Pots and Pans by CCG guy. Welcome back, Doug.
Thank you, Chris. I've never been buffered my whole life. It's a great forum.
Excellent. You and I, we've got a bunch of stuff to talk about. Some hot topics. We're going to talk about what's going on with the Digital Equity Act, the NDIA lawsuit from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance that has had some news. We're going to talk about a customer survey of rural broadband, and I'm curious about that. We're not going to go too deep on it. There's a blog post that you did that's great. We'll talk a little bit about pole attachments, and then we're going to talk about satellites and how the FCC is changing the rules around that. So we got a bunch of topics, and I don't know much about any of them, so I'm hoping you can carry the freight. But the only other thing that I think I would note is that I feel like we've talked about BEAD a ton, and I am more certain than ever. I've just been talking to some folks lately that have been going through it, some who are walking away from it. And I guess I'm more certain now than ever that the American Rescue Plan Act approach of giving money to localities and saying, you know what the problem is, you make the investments that are smart, that proves to be a very smart solution. And the whole, like, we're going to figure out everything in Washington, D.C. and then like micromanage everything did not work out so well. What's your top line like lesson from all that at this point?
Absolutely. I mean, the program that worked the best was Capital Projects Fund. Same money as ARPA. All they did was they went, state, here's your money to go solve broadband. Here's 5 rules, and they didn't. And this was done by was that Treasury, and they didn't micromanage it at all. They just said, here's your money. That you do have to prove to us that you're doing these 4 or 5 things, but it was very broad, and so everybody used that. States used that money to build broadband, and they all, a lot of them took different approaches, but that money went out the door fast. I mean,
Yeah.
some states had grant programs 3 and 4 months after they got the money.
Yeah, so this isn't a critique, I think, of
Yeah,
bureaucrats in DC or in the
no,
States. This is just a recognition that there are a number of things for which trying to do this elegant solution in which you identify every last home in the country that doesn't have service, and then you figure out the best technology for all of them, and you have this complex bidding, just, it's not a good idea. It takes too long, and it's not that efficient. It's not worth all the trade-offs. Better to get the money out, have some basic safeguards, and then if the localities screw it up, they will be held to account.
well, it came out of the congressional language, but a common sense regulatory agency would have said, that's not practical, let's do it this way. So they stuck to that every single location thing. And then they're still doing it, Chris. They're still coming back to grants that have already been awarded and changing the locations on people. It's
Yeah, well,
ridiculous.
they're
It's
disappearing
ridiculous.
locations in a bunch of
Yes,
places,
yes, yes.
and so it's anyway. It's gone from flawed to farcical, and it's gross and
Yeah,
disgusting.
absolutely.
Okay, NDIA had some action in that court case. If people recall, there's like $2.5 billion was set aside for Digital Equity Act. This
2.75 billion.
Thank
Yes,
you.
yes.
So that money was set aside in order to allow different targeted groups of people that made up actually a majority of the country, but like, veterans and people that that don't speak the language well. And I'm trying to remember all the different groups. One of the groups was racially, historically marginalized folks. And on the basis of that, we think the Trump administration, specifically Donald Trump himself, put out a social media post in which he said, I'm calling this unconstitutional. I'm not going to spend this money that's going to do training and device distribution so people can use the internet, and cancel the program. That's not how it works. You can't just do that. So the National Digital Inclusion Alliance filed a lawsuit and said, you can't do it that way. And what have the courts said, Doug? We just got some updates on that.
Well, let me tell you what the court said, and then I want to give you the history of how we got to what the court said, because we don't know what to do with what the court said. So the court said, which we're all still trying to really believe they said that, but a DOJ lawyer told the judge that if they, whoever they is, just takes the racial part of that rules out, that they would go ahead and not oppose this anymore. And so now I don't know who they can do that. I don't believe the judge has the authority to make that change. NDIA certainly does not have the authority to negotiate that for the whole country. So I don't know who that comment is aimed at.
Right.
But
I mean, so a normal process would have been that a group such as like the ACLU or perhaps one of the more conservative groups would have sued and said, this is an unconstitutional
yes,
racial preference that needs to be removed. It would have gone through a court case. And then
yes,
eventually, if it was found that that was the case, it would have been removed and the rest of the act likely would have remained. There's a whole body of
yes,
thought around severability of contracts and legislation. And this word
yes.
severability is like comes into play. So, but
Yeah,
that
so
didn't happen.
in that case, a judge could have said, "Yes, you have to do this. The racial thing either stays in or stays out." But NDIA just sued and said, "You can't cancel the program." And so that was their entire lawsuit. So
Right.
they didn't get into the nitty gritty details. But let's go back and look at a little history of how we got to there in the first place. This stuff was awarded, and this program started in 2000. That's a long time ago. There was supposed to be 4 years of grant program starting in 22, 22, 3, 4, and 5, or maybe 5 years, and 6, I think, had one. And so the old NTIA completely screwed this up.
The
The
Biden NTIA.
the Biden NTIA, they didn't issue the first set of potential grants until 2024, and so that was covering the first 3 years, 22, 23, and 24. Half of this money could have been spent already
Mhm.
long before the lawsuit. So they bundled all 3 of those years in, and that makes no sense. This is not like BEAD where they were fighting over locations and stuff. This is simply a grant that said you can use money to give people computers, you can train them how to use computers, you can do some job training. I mean, it was a pretty li simple list of things that you could use the money for, and nobody really argued about those things. And so, but it took them all that time, so they didn't get the first set of grants out for 4 years, and by that time, we had a change of administration, and you're absolutely right. Everyone's pretty confident that the grant got canceled because it had the word equity in the title.
Right. They were this is a time when there was a lot of people in the federal government, it's most commonly associated with those working for Elon Musk and Doge, was that they were doing word searches
A
and
word search on everything with the word equity, they tried to cancel.
yeah, they didn't bother to understand what it was. I mean, there was debates with Doge people trying to get rid of programs that supported home equity loans
Yes.
because they
Yes.
didn't because these are also people that had no idea what a home equity loan was.
Well,
And
no, they're
so
23-year-old snot-nosed rats is who they are, but yes.
I mean, I'm
Uh,
sure some of them weren't quite that bad, but yes, that was my
yes.
impression.
That's my impression, yeah. So yeah, so, if it would have been called the Digital Inclusion Act, it might not have been canceled, right? So, I mean,
Right,
seriously,
or the let's get money to like rural based people who've served
yeah,
in the armed forces to like so they can use computers and
yeah.
actually try to improve their situation in life.
But, so now we have this court case, and the answer is, I don't think that changes anything, that what the DOJ said, because that court can't deal with that statement.
Well, I sort of wonder if like it could be the situation in which the administration was to say, all right, we're going to reinstate this. We're going to follow the law. Fingers crossed. We're not going to do anything that involves racial preferences or racial equity language, and nobody will sue them because they'll just be happy that the money's still getting out there. I think that could be an approach that would work.
Well, that's what we're all hoping for, but, Ariel Roth just had a big presentation in front of Congress, and she didn't mention this thing again. So I don't believe they're planning to do that because I believe she would have taken credit for that if they were going to do that. So
No, you're right. That would have been a time to do it. She's very focused on getting computers out of schools, oddly. So
yes,
it,
out of schools, not into schools,
I
out of
don't.
schools. Correct.
I can't even. I just like I don't want to even talk about the merits of it. It's just not her job, and it's unreal
No.
to me. Like what is going on? So that's basically we're in this situation right now in which we're not really sure what's going to go on. In that I feel like there's not a mechanism to do what the Department of Justice has proposed, aside from the Trump administration just perhaps starting to do it and the lawsuit being dismissed.
And we
I don't
and
know.
we don't know that wasn't just a the DOJ right now is staffed with a whole bunch of brand new rookie
Right.
prosecutors and some incompetent prosecutors. All the good people left, and it wasn't even a party thing. Good prosecutors didn't stay there. I mean, I think they lost 70% of their original prosecutors,
Right. And the
and
ones who are
so
there are totally overworked now.
yeah. So who knows what? what prompted that guy. That may not represent the administration
That was my other thought. I was
position.
like maybe he just made that up. I mean, I'm
He
if you're
might
an
have just
adminis
made that up to make the judge happy for all we know. The judge might have said, "Why are you guys being so obstinate?" He goes, "Oh, no, we're good." I mean, who
yeah.
knows, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, I feel like we'll keep an eye on this
Yeah.
and try to get a sense of what's going on.
But it's a shame that it's a shame that they didn't sue on the equity word, because that in that case, that statement would have meant something, but they didn't. So, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, who would have known at that point?
Yeah.
Um, so you did a post about a rural broadband customer survey that I just found quite interesting. Well, let me give you the ability to start this one off. What did you find interesting from the results of that?
Well, it comes from Innovative Systems, who's an OSS BSS system, and they've I don't know, this is their
They provide like software to run the back side of the customer, the subscriptions, and
it's their 11th survey, so they do this every year. They don't ask the same questions, but it's real basic stuff, how to use your computer and that sort of stuff. So, what I always find interesting about it is the percentage of people who, I mean, they found and this was about rural this year. This survey was about rural households. Other years, it's not been about rural. And they found that rural households use their computer 10 hours a day. That's a lot of hours.
sure is.
I mean, that's a whole lot of hours. You got to figure people are off working and stuff. So, only 7% used it less than 3% a day. So I just find every one of these statistics kind of blows me away a little bit because, um, and this was probably the most important one to me, was that 46% of rural households use a computer to work at home at least part time. That's not nearly that percent in cities, because cities people go to work, right? But in rural areas, you can't find jobs around you.
Hmm.
That's really probably the most important thing, and we've seen that in real life. I worked with one of your Minnesota counties, um, and we did a survey there, and this was Yellow Medicine County. Every single farm that we talked to had someone who worked at home,
Hmm.
because you
Yeah,
have to.
they're far from the metro.
You have to. So, so computers are massively important to these rural areas, and so that statistic just kind of blows you away. So,
Yeah, and reliable
uh,
connectivity. For me,
yeah.
the part that blows me away is I just feel like people misunderstand this. Like, you remember like all the discussion and some of the people I like them, but some of the crotchety old men who are just like, making all this investments just so people can stream Netflix, rah, 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 this whole cat videos and
Yeah.
and just this idea that it was not worth it. 81% use email, 79% stream entertainment. That's about what I would have expected. 97% of respondents use social media. That's why people have those connections. They don't have it to stream entertainment. They have it because we are a social species and we connect to other people, and that's how they use it. Now, if you want to count up the number of bits that they use over the course of the month, then you'll find that yeah, most of those bits
It's
came
all
from
entertainment.
Netflix.
It's all
Yeah, but
entertainment.
that's not
Yeah.
how you measure things. That's not
No.
if you want to measure how people care about it and why they have it, it's to connect with other people. It's just and so it's this question of like how do you
And
measure?
if you ask them what they would most miss, it's gonna be that. And people go, "Well, social media is a waste of time." People don't understand how rural people use social media. This is how you find out what's going on in the community. All your community organizations have a page, and that's where they tell you what's going on.
Yeah, there's
I
no
mean,
local newspaper that's left. There's no nothing.
Facebook is the new local newspaper, and I don't think that people realize that, so it really is, so yeah. In an urban area like you and I live, that's not my newspaper, but it certainly is in small counties.
Well, I don't know. I think that hyper local stuff, like I would think that
Yeah.
actually, I mean, we're lucky enough that we live in a part of St. Paul that does still have a thriving newspaper that just covers some local stuff and big city actions. Um, but a lot of places, you really would get that from a Facebook or some local I'm trying to think of there's some cool like front porch forum is huge in Vermont and in some places where people organize like that locally.
Yeah, years ago, what's the no, Cook County in Minnesota, the very
Mhm.
northern one, sticks up in the air.
Right over
The
Lake Superior.
yeah, the local Facebook this was their only form of local. They didn't have a radio station, they didn't have a TV station, and so that was it. So social media was the place to find out anything in the community.
Mhm.
So this is really how it works. So yeah.
Yeah, I do think there is a local radio station up there, but it might be, down in Lake County, so I
Yeah,
don't know how far
yeah,
it goes.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's not truly local. Yes.
right.
Yes.
Okay, so pole attachments. Wanted to talk about this. You have again great posts on pots and pans by CCG. For people who aren't checking that out, they should. But whenever I'm planning to have you on, I always want to be like, oh wait, what are the hot topics that Doug's been thinking about and are fresh in his brain? And you just wrote about what's going on in the world of pole attachments. It seems like a potential kind of revolution in how pole attachments are regulated.
Yeah. 19 this goes back to the 1934 Act. So 1934 Telecommunications Act.
So you're saying it doesn't go back to
It
Woodrow
does.
Wilson, just checking, because I think Woodrow
No.
Wilson was dead by then, or at least he certainly had had his stroke at that point. So,
This does not go back to Woodrow Wilson. So
okay.
just in case anyone who might be listening to the show is a big Woodrow Wilson
He's
fan,
retired. I don't know if he cares
uh,
anymore.
he might be listening though. So, but that 1934 Act said you have to regulate polls, and right immediately it said, but states can do it themselves, and if not, the FCC should do it. And so what happened over the years, and that's called reverse preemption, which is some damn lawyer term, but so
I think it
over
actually goes
the
back to the Catholic Church, but
could be
with subsidiarity for people that really want to dig into it.
so over the years, 22 states have elected to do their own pole attachments. And so pole attachment rules are how much do you pay to get a pole attachment? How long does it take? What are the remedies? Most states will have their own rules. If things aren't working right, you can go to the state commission and try to get a remedy. So states that, but typically the states that have their own rules are the ones that have a lot of polls. I mean, some states don't have a lot of polls. Um, so so 22 states have put these in. Some of these have been in place. The list was almost that long when I got in industry 50 years ago. I mean, these states have been doing this forever. A lot of
And some
states have
states have
not.
been innovative. Like Maine has been
Yeah,
innovative with one touch make ready efforts and things
yes.
like that.
Some of the states actually started that stuff before the FCC, who eventually adopted it. Right, exactly. So, I mean, I was actually a witness in the Maine one many years ago, where they were the first one to put shot clocks in too. So they've always been very innovative. Um, but the FCC, for some reason, which I well, it seems like all they're doing is giving the big carriers everything they want, and I think the big carriers assume the FCC will regulate stuff less than the states. Otherwise, I can't even see why they're doing this. But there are, over half the states have stuck with the FCC because their poll attachment rules aren't bad. I
Hmm.
mean, they're livable, but there's no local flavor. And the biggest problem with being in the FCC rules is if you get into a dispute between a poll owner and an ISP, you have to go to the FCC for a remedy, and that's a black hole time wise. It doesn't
Right.
happen
I
quickly.
intervened. I tried to get involved in one or two of those, and it was just like the small ISP was fighting against a local investor-owned electric
Yeah,
company, and the electric company I think was basically like, "We'll wait till the end of the universe to
yeah.
deal with this because the FCC is not going to move on it anytime soon."
No, no. So, but in states, a lot of the states actually move on those disputes pretty quickly. So the FCC came out of the blue. I mean, there was no pre-discussion. The industry's not been talking about we need this, and they put out a request for comment that said we're thinking of making every state recertify their program, and we don't even know that they ever certified to start with. We think that all they had to do was write to the FCC and go, per the act, we're taking over our own poll regulations here.
Yeah. Here's my certification. We got this.
We got this. Exactly. So now they want states to come and ask the FCC for permission to do their own poll regulations. And the
And this
only
is from
reason
the
they,
Republicans, the party of Washington
yes,
D.C. should be in control of everything suddenly.
suddenly, and this is also the party in charge of light touch regulation, where we don't want to tell people what to do. So both of those things. So all of a sudden, they're going to ask. Now this has to pass, but this FCC, when they ask the question, they're going to order it. They're not going to change. It doesn't matter what those comments are. They're going to order this now in another 90 or 120 days. So they're going to make states come in. You're going to say, can I please regulate my own polls? And they're going to go, oh, you're a red state. Yeah, you're good. Oh, you're California. No, we're taking it over from you. No particular rhyme or reason, because California actually is a really interesting state because they really forced the rates low. California is real conscious to keep the poll attachment rates low. But so because they're complaining that states are, not following the rate rules and all that. The rate rules are spelled out if, in just 3 sentences in the original 1934 Act. Rates have to be equitable and based upon costs. And so, it's impossible to say any state's doing it wrong. Nobody's trying to make a big profit off of poll attachments because it's not in the benefit of the states or the feds to do that. So,
Well,
um,
there's another thing going on too simultaneously, right? Which is that historically the cooperatives and the munis, basically the publicly owned entities that are accountable to the public, they were not held to those rules. They had the ability to do more self regulation because there
yes,
was an expectation that if they were acting against the community interests, people would be like, "What the heck?" and they could just change
right.
it. Whereas you know that a big investor owned electricity company, like for instance Xcel Energy up here in Minnesota, they have an interest in trying to drive the poll rates up because they don't really care what happens to any of these communities. It doesn't bother them. They're just trying to get as much money as they can. But a co-op, if it's making life hard for people, people have a means of changing that policy. But it seems like the federal government, and particularly back to Ariel Roth and NTIA, am I understanding correctly that NTIA is requiring the co-ops that are going to get BEAD dollars potentially to have to then adhere to the FCC's rules that had not previously applied to them?
And not just for BEAD, they have to adhere to them for all time. They have to,
That's remarkable.
in order to get, and some of them, like I know a co-op I'm working with who got already funded 95% of their network, and they were going after 500 locations with BEAD. And so they would have to put all their polls under FCC jurisdiction to get funding for 500 polls. You can guess what he said. He's like, "F that,"
Yeah.
because that's
Well, I mean,
that's the end. That's the end of my beat. I don't want it.
yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, people should appreciate that, like, the co-ops range from Pedernales, which is outside Austin, and not even outside Austin anymore, which now has like 3 million members and incredible
yeah,
density. And like these South Carolina co-ops that have like the suburbs have grown into them and they have like a lot of density. They're totally different from the co-ops in other places. I mean, I visited one up in Alaska, and the idea that these are all going to be subject to the same rules is ludicrous.
yeah. No, it is. And, another one is the capital of Oregon. Portland is completely inside of a co-op. So it didn't used to be, but it is now, right? So, but yeah, most co-ops are exactly the opposite of that. They're just tiny. And now, one of the things that none of these guys like, the state poll rules actually also have rules about keeping your polls in good shape. And that's the one the electric companies hate. And I have to think that the electric companies are behind this because they know that the FCC's not been pushing them on that. Some of the states are pushing them on that. The
Yeah,
states are
this is
pushing,
important.
a lot of the states are like pushing poll inventories, and you have to have a plan to update your oldest polls. And so that's so I don't know that this is coming from telcos and ISPs. I think this is coming from the poll owners,
Hmm.
the big
That's interesting.
utilities, because that's what they absolutely hate those rules.
I mean,
Um,
when I
yeah,
try to get a sense of what's really happening out there, because I can appreciate that people are like, "Yeah, Chris, your theory is great. That city owned or cooperatively owned would operate differently, but like they also are run by people that have their own incentives and they don't really care what the neighbors think and stuff like that." But I look for empirical evidence, and one of the things that has struck me was it was like when did Hurricane Sandy hit? Was that must have been 2012 because it was during the election, right? And there's I don't remember if it was Sandy or the storms that happened the year before or the year after, but there was a series of storms in New England. And I think it was Reuters did a big piece looking at why it was that National Grid and the other investor owned electric utilities were out for a week after these storms. And the municipal providers, there's no real co ops in New England. There's one in New Hampshire, but there's just not much else. But the municipal providers were out for like usually a day or less. And they looked back at decades of maintenance budgets and found that the investor owned utilities had stopped trimming the trees and doing other stuff
right.
to protect their poles. And so what you're talking about, Doug, like I can imagine people are like, well, who really cares? Is it like if they don't maintain the poles, that's their problem. Yeah, until you get electrocuted or until you lose power to the hospital and like any
Right.
number of other places, because these companies are skimping. They're taking your money that they're supposed to put into maintenance and they're giving it to their shareholders and their executives. And that's a real problem. It needs to be managed to make sure that doesn't happen. And yeah, the federal government is not going to do as good a job of that as the states. Although the states aren't going to do a perfect job, that's not the argument.
We had Hurricane Helene here,
Yeah,
And
you had
and
experience
and
with it.
and Duke and Duke has done a pretty good job with tree trimming in the city. They do not do a good job in the country, and so that's where they had all the big problems. But even here in the city now, I would say 15% of the poles lean sideways. I my guess is they're never gonna fix them because there's no one making them do that. So the next time we have a storm, it's gonna be a disaster. I mean, you just I'm a guy who drives around looking at poles. That's an idiot thing to do. My wife gets real annoyed.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I was just talking with folks at Anza Electric Cooperative about
Yeah,
the challenges they've faced. And like, for instance, they do not use wooden poles anymore. And I suspect this
right.
is true for others. I don't know. I don't know if PG&E still uses wooden poles, but Anza is basically like everything is a metal or a concrete.
Yeah.
I don't remember what it was, but like it's something
And
that
and
won't burn.
some of each, there's both. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and they'll put in stuff that they can, even if everything burns off the pole, they can get new
right.
stuff on the pole quickly,
Yes.
and take care of it because they're trying to figure out how to serve they live there. Like this is their territory. They take it seriously.
I've actually seen it. Even if a tree knocks one of those over, if the tree falls down and knocks over a metal pole, you cut the tree up in pieces and you stand the pole back up. I mean, it doesn't break the pole. So it's
Yeah.
like, yes. So it's really that is the way to go. They cost more, but they're good for 100 years. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, anything else on the pole attachments? I feel like
That I just think it's extraordinary that the FCC wants to take over local regulation. They want to take over pole attachments. They want to take over wireless permitting. They want to take over fiber permitting. They simply want to do it all themselves. And on the surface, that doesn't sound bad, except what they really want to do is when they take that over, then they don't want to regulate anything.
no, and they don't put competent people in charge of it. I mean,
No.
it's incompetent people, it's understaffed, and it falls through the cracks. People don't pay attention. And I mean, if we talk about BEAD again for a second, right? You mentioned Oregon in the co-op there. Like you look at Oregon and Washington, right? And like these are states for whom, if you want to talk about the average cost of doing something, and this is true in many places, but I think about it over there pretty like Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington are fundamentally different regions than the Western
Yes.
parts of those states. And to some extent in Oregon, you've got like a majority of the people that live in the Portland metro. And when you look at how BEAD and these other programs work, they look at a state and they're like, okay, we're going to do an average cost of this state. Well, that's ridiculous. Like you
Yeah.
don't pick it. That's not how averages work. And so when it comes to BEAD, you've got on the eastern parts of these states, people are getting screwed and they're not going to be able to build the networks that are needed because they can't hit the numbers that people in the western part of the state can hit because the densities are totally different. And I don't even think people understand that at a numerical level in DC.
Well, that's what they did to North Carolina because um, all all 7 of the most western states, 100% of the grants, 100% of BEAD went to satellite because they lowered the amount of money. They cut it in half with the benefit of bargain round and
Mhm.
BEAD, and then nobody wanted to take the money anymore. So there's 7 counties here where their only BEAD solution is, and not only is it satellite, it's Amazon, who doesn't even have a product. So, yes.
No, no, they have 200 satellites in orbit now, Doug. They're well on their
Oh,
way.
oh, they're almost to 300.
Okay. All right. We're gonna move on then to the satellites. Actually, that was a perfect
Yes,
segue if I'd realized it, but I forgot what we're
it
talking about
was.
for the last
It
topic.
was.
So,
Um,
segue achieved. The FCC is changing our way how the satellites are being regulated, and I don't know. Like I will say that I want to come to this with an open mind because although I'm deeply frustrated with the corruption and stupidity of the Federal Communications Commission, very willing to believe that the government approach from the Federal Communications Commission of how to deal with satellites may need to change when you go from having like a few thousand satellites to having potentially 100,000 in a few years. It's I can imagine that we may need some different regulations. So I'm open to it, but from your work, it doesn't seem like it's necessarily the smartest approach here.
well, first off, they did need to be modernized. The rules were written 20, 30 years ago when there barely were any satellites, right? I mean, the entire planet before all this broadband stuff didn't have 2,000 satellites, the entire from all the countries everywhere, right? And so there wasn't a whole lot to regulate. I mean, there was only one collision between satellites in history. The two of them ran into each other. It's like, yeah, we should probably do something about that, right? So there
Mhm.
wasn't a whole lot of rules. And so all of a sudden now we literally are talking about 4 or 500,000 satellites potentially in the next 10 years. I mean, big numbers, because it's not just we're not just talking Starlink. There's 2 different giant companies in China. There's a big company in Europe. I mean, there's gonna be a lot of satellites up there,
Now,
so
if we pause there for a second to give people a sense, are you familiar with the book The Three Body Problem, Doug?
yeah, yeah,
So brilliant, brilliant book, brilliant trilogy. I loved it. Netflix has done a good job of developing it as well. And the premise is that like the gravitational challenges of three bodies rotating around, moving around each other, is incredibly hard to compute.
it is.
And right now we have on the order of 20,000 satellites, I want to say, up in space. And there's a few companies that are able to manage the trajectories to make predictions about potential collisions. I think a lot
Yeah.
of
Yeah, I'd say
folks are working.
we're around 20,000. Starlink will hit by December, we'll hit 12,000. There's been a whole bunch of there's a whole bunch of companies that have 300, 500. So there's
Right.
probably that
But
many.
there's only
Yeah.
a couple of companies that have the sophistication to be able to like
Yeah.
make the predictions of which satellites could bump into each other.
Yes.
And
Yes.
to be clear, like we're talking about an area of space that is much larger than the surface of the Earth. And so if I told
Yes.
you there was 20,000 objects scattered around the Earth and they might bump into each other, you might laugh at me. But above Earth, they are traveling at 14,000 miles per hour or something like that.
Well,
Like,
and they're putting them in a very narrow band that's only
right.
about 3 or 400 miles wide. So that it's not like this isn't all of space. There's got they're talking about having, 400, 500,000 satellites in a 300-mile wide thing. All of a sudden, that's starting to sound kinda crowded.
When
I would think it with that many satellites, you should be able to look up at any time and see 10 or 15 of them. That's crowded,
Well, and
right?
the point I wanted to
Yes.
make is that you can put up enough satellites that we do not have the computational power to make all the
Yes.
predictions to make sure that they avoid each other. And I think I talked previously, there's academic papers that have been looking into the issues around solar interference when you have these solar storms.
Yes.
And that can knock out the communications for the satellites, making it impossible to move their orbits and moving us closer to this dreaded scenario of having a cascading series of collisions in
Oh, it's worse
space.
it's way worse than what you just said. A year ago, this new administration laid off a lot of the folks who track satellites.
Of course.
Now they brought them back because Starlink and all goes, we kind of need those people because they're the ones who want them. They actually are like, we'd rather you, the government, do that than make that our responsibility, right? But they did lay some of them off. And of course, anytime you have a government layoff of that magnitude, what you did was you lost the institutional knowledge, and the people they hired back are not near, they have a 10-year learning curve, right? I mean, if all you do all day is track satellites, I would think you get pretty good at it after a while, right?
Well, and
So,
you remember why you did this thing 15 years ago that no one else does,
right,
and like that
right.
odd, rare problem. But let's get
Yeah.
back to, so what is
So,
the Federal
so
Communications
what
Commission doing?
the regulation, first off, they're going to first off, it's the longest order I've ever seen. It's 296 pages. And I love regulations and I can't read it all. So I started reading the chapter headers. I've read about a half of it. It's just, so what they're doing, first off, they're throwing out a lot of the old stuff. A lot of the old stuff had to do with the guys who are 20,000 miles up. So they're changing their rules a lot because who the hell cares what they do? There's 13 of them, and I don't care if they put 3,000 of them. They're 20,000 miles away. They are not going to run into each other, right?
Right. It would be
There's a,
difficult to intentionally run into each other.
it was very difficult. They put in new rules for space stations. It's like, well, how many of those are there? Right now, there's none. There's one or two. And
Right.
so,
We just put out a contract for a tug to
yeah,
deorbit it, which is fascinating.
yeah, yeah. So there's some rules about that, but they got rid of a lot of those old things, and they needed to be modernized. So I have no question they have to do it. But here's the part that bothers me. What they want to do is they want anyone who applies to put up a new satellite, they want to implement what's called bright line regulation. And in case you don't know what that means a regulation that's very simple to understand.
Hmm.
And
This
so,
is generally what I'm in favor of.
yes, a bright line regulation is you can't buy beer until you're 18.
Right. There might be like reasons, even if you're super mature at 17, you can't do it.
You're either 18 or you're not. That's the bright line. It's a bright line. You just talked about it. Satellite constellations are amazingly complicated. I don't want them to only have to check off 7 boxes and they go, fine, you have your permission. Because that's what they're talking about. They're talking about they're talking about a process to come in and go, I want to put up 500 satellites to do, paging or cellular or whatever. And they go, fine. Did you check off the 7 boxes? Did you swear they're good? Yes. Well, here you get your permit.
As
I
opposed to
we
perhaps some engineer having to
well,
review that on an impartial
well,
basis.
in the past, here was the process in the past. In the past, you had to give very detailed engineering specifications. Believe it or not, they used to publish those. So the very first 2 applications from Starlink were made public, and then they all decided that was trade secrets. And now, so ever since then, you never see those anymore. But they were very exhaustive. That's how the only thing we know about Starlink are those original papers. It told us everything about them, right? And so you had to prove to the FCC that you knew what you were doing, that you were that these satellites weren't going to crash, they were going to be able to go to the right orbit, that you would be able to move them if there was a problem. You had a way to change your attitude. All those. They had a long list of things that you had to prove to them. You had to prove that you had enough spectrum to support them, and that they weren't going to interfere with other people's spectrum, and long, long, long list of all the things you have to do. Brightline's going to do away with that. They're just going to go, you know, they're just, I mean, this is obviously a pro satellite company set of regulations. Starlink, remember, proposed to put up 1,000,000 satellites for a data center in the sky. And that got countered by Amazon saying they wanted to put up 150,000 satellites for a data center in the sky. That's a lot of satellites. And under, if they have bright line regulations, they're going to go, we're going to go to these orbits. We know what we're doing. You should approve this.
Yeah, no,
Right.
check the boxes, and
Yeah.
what happens internally is you have engineers who are like likely to be like, oh, you know what, like we don't really know if the system will really work, for instance, to like move it around and that sort of
No.
thing. And there will be this pressure of we have a launch date, we have to hit this, the investors are expecting us to do it. And that's what drives this. It's not like this concern about what happens when these things collide. It's what happens to the investors if we miss our dates. And you get pressure to then to basically fudge the check boxes is what my concern would be.
Well, yeah. And people probably don't realize this, but the FCC has a huge number of engineers, and these are good engineers. They hire some of the best. So if you want to do something with wireless, you got to prove all sorts of stuff to them. I
Yeah,
mean,
find me an
w-
electronics device that doesn't have an FCC stamp on it.
correct. So if they pass these bright line rules, it's going to be easier to put a satellite constellation than it is to bring a new radio into the country. Because they really check it out. The engineers, and currently their satellite engineers, they make you answer all their questions. And if you file and you only ask half the questions, they go, no, where's the other half of the questions? You got to answer my questions, and they do. And so I think we want that. So I don't want
Right,
I
because
don't mind. I don't mind now. They could have speeded up the process because they can always speed up the process, but they can't shortcut the process. And that's what the problem is. Brightline, by definition, shortcuts the process. So, yeah.
well, and I think again to just bring it back to like, okay, what's the big deal? So a company puts up 500 satellites and screws up. It's their fault. They'll just they've lost their investment and it doesn't work the way they thought they would.
No,
Until it creates a debris belt, it means we can't launch
yes.
anything through the debris belt for a period of years while we wait for it to clear. That is changes everyone's lives for the worse.
No, we're talking about if there's a major satellite constellation, we would set off a chain reaction, but upon all these, we would have a cloud of debris that would probably be there for 50,000 years, meaning we couldn't go into space anymore.
Well, that would be the worst case scenario in the right orbits. If it was in a low Earth orbit, it could clear in 5 to 10 years, depending. I mean, I presume so. There are some bad cases that aren't disastrous, but it's still really bad. If we could launch for 5 years, that would be really, really bad. There's a ton of technology we use that would stop working
The
over time.
satellites are up there have been shredded. We no longer have weather satellites and communication satellites. That's kind of bad. Yeah. Um, so I don't know that I care that we don't have defense satellites anymore, but
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 you might.
I'm
I mean, it really depends. I mean, you're in North Carolina, a little bit on the interior,
but how would I know, right?
right?
You have a good point there. So yes. So no, this idea of being able, I mean, this, I would have to call this the Elon Musk regulation. He's like, it's too hard, make it simple. So they did.
But this is the thing that kills me is that like it's so short-sighted because this isn't even in his benefit or the benefit of of Bezos as well. The sort of these people who are like probably nothing will happen, and certainly nothing will happen to me in the worst case scenario. Like they're individually insulated from it. The worst thing that happens for them is there's some sort of bankruptcy or something. But like this question of what happens to the rest of us is it but ultimately
Well,
space is well suited, like the space industry will be well served if we don't have a different operator, whether that's Elon Musk or whether that's the next shadow, operating by night organization comes through and screws everything up for everyone else. And this is why we have these regulations. A lot of companies actually have good supply chains and don't want to put poisonous ingredients in the milk, right? But like they have good regulations to make sure that those who aren't that good or either incompetent or have malice on the mind, that they can't ruin it for the good companies also.
now there is a question about whether the FCC actually can do this because all the all the companies who have stuff in space are part of something called the ITU, which is the International Something Union, but I think it's in Italian, the actual name of it. But it's a group of all of them, and they agree on all the rules for stuff like radio spectrums, and they agree on satellite stuff. And so I don't know that the US can arbitrarily allow bad actors in space by changing these rules. The rest of the world might say, no, you can't do that. So, and of course, what happens? What's the ITU's position? Throw us out?
Well, I think
Yeah.
that we're going to see this tested, Doug. I mean,
Oh,
whether it's us or
We
whether
will.
it's, some either nation or perhaps area of land that's not well controlled, seeing rocket launches. I think we're
Well,
going to see this in the next 10, 15 years.
one of the I mean, I told you there was 2 Chinese companies. One of them is completely controlled and owned by the Chinese government. Are they gonna follow the rules? The other one's a commercial company out of Singapore, and they're not really Chinese, so and the government doesn't have any role in that one, but, you know, there's nothing you're right, there's nothing to stop Joe Bob from having a satellite company if there's bright line regulations. There one bad satellite could set off this chain reaction.
Well,
That's
and I
how
think, I mean,
that's how tender space is, yes,
and
so
ultimately for those of you who are into there's some really good near term perspective like war fiction about battles between the US and in China, for instance, and it always starts in space, and like that's probably the real threat, ultimately. If we end up in that scenario, none of this stuff for commercial space really matters a whole lot.
well, no, I mean, if the Chinese wanted to do it, now they're gonna have their own big satellite, but they could start that chain reaction to wipe out everyone's satellites and put Elon out of business,
Mhm.
along with themselves. So that's the trouble is nobody wants to do that, so, now I have to think that the surveillance satellites are not at the same orbit level. We don't know where those are because they don't tell us.
Right. I mean,
Uh, that's
I think.
that's a secret what altitude those are
Right,
at,
but
so
yet it's known, right? Someone has
yes,
a database of
somebody
like,
knows,
yeah,
yes,
because like it's measurable with the
yes.
telescope,
Yeah.
presumably. So.
Yes, it is. I'm sure if I actually went to Space News, there's an article in there about it somewhere, but yeah.
And I mean, I will say, what is it? I think it's satellite map dot space.
Yeah.
There's
Oh,
a great,
there's companies that track every single satellite. It's really
yeah.
kinda cool to
If
watch
people
these
aren't
things.
familiar, satellite
Yeah,
map dot space, so cool. Different,
yeah,
you can just see everything that's around the planet. So,
yeah. Nowadays,
um,
people track everything. When they track where every rich person's airplane goes, you know the people track you.
yeah, I don't know how much longer that's gonna last. We'll
Yeah,
see until there'll be some sort of like kind of like for a while you know who owned a website, right? But now
right.
everyone is behind a mask of
Yes,
whoever the registrar is, puts up a screen and you
right.
can't see it. I think that the tail numbers may well be scrubbed for certain people in certain planes in the future. We'll see.
Well, then it might
Um,
just say "rich guy on a plane." That's all I need to
Right.
know.
Right. Right, it's like, someone else just reminded me of this. It's like the diplomatic immunity from the movies in the '80s, Lethal Weapon 2 in particular with
Yeah.
they get to do what they want. You hit a certain level of wealth. Anything else you wanna mention? Anything else interesting going on?
Nah, that's a lot. I have a blog tomorrow, which you'll find interesting, talking about the future of broadband offices. Um, yeah, so uh, somebody, I guess it was Benton, maybe, who wrote an article about that, and then I took their first sentence or two and then went off. They First off, Benton said, "Hey, there's about half of the states their broadband offices sunset, meaning they said you're going to be in business 5 years, and then that's how long your funding lasts. And it
Hmm.
happened to coincide with the federal funding. They expected BEAD to pay for most of this, right? Well, when that funding runs out, a lot of them are just going to let the broadband offices shut down. Now, they still have obligations. They're supposed to still track BEAD spending and all that. But if a
Right. They'll
state
bury it in the
goes,
Department of Commerce or something.
well, but states will just go, I don't care what my obligations are. I'm not doing it anymore. What are they going to do, right? So,
Right.
are they going
Come
to
take
come
the network
pull?
back.
Are they going to pull the fiber out of the ground? I mean, I don't think so. Uh, so, so, well, Pew wrote the article, and Pew came out with like 6 or 7 things that they should consider doing, but they were all socially responsible. And it's like, you're asking state governments to be socially responsible. Are you sure about this? it's we all would love it because we're insiders of the industry. Like,
So
yeah,
you're taking more of a
we went.
realistic approach.
I'm taking a realistic approach. I mean, it'd be wonderful if they really take inventories and track things and get statistics, and because that's the kind of stuff that would be really wonderful to have. But I
Yeah, you
don't know
mentioned
this.
this before with like having an inventory. I mean, if you really wanted to have a pro competition activity, making it easier to get on polls and identifying where there are where there's like free attachment space, and where you could put together certain paths, and where there's like open conduit, like, and making that
Right?
more available to small ISPs, that would make investment a lot easier.
If I had to get a fiber line through the DC metro area and I had that complete inventory, I could find a path where it was the cheapest, which means also the easiest, which means there's room on the poles, right?
Which probably would be
Which
like
would be good.
3x less than if you didn't have that information, right? I mean, like, significant
Oh,
difference.
yeah. No, I think you would cut the cost by 2/3. And those would be the poles where the guys aren't going to mind you getting on. They're like, well, yeah, they're open. That's good. My fiber route would run through neighborhoods. Well, oh, I don't care. As a
Mhm.
pole owner, as a fiber owner, like I don't need to follow the major highways. So, but no, the inventories would be wonderful. We'll see if hardly anyone has done anything like that. West Virginia wanted to use their non-deployment funds to force that, but um, that's the only one so far who made us. I guess Vermont talked about it, so people are talking about it, but that's not the same thing as having this wonderful inventory. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate your time, Doug, and it's been a fun conversation covering everything from how people use the internet to the future of annihilating our ability to get off the planet. So it's a pretty wide
Well,
ranging conversation.
what I love is that 97% of the people have a chance to see this video.
I hope all 97% of them share it on social media.
Exactly. I think it could happen. It could happen. So,
All right. Well, thank you.
thank you, Chris.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Unbuffered podcast. We have transcripts for this and other episodes available at ilsr.org/podcast. While you're there, check out our other podcasts from ILSR, including Building Local Power, Local Energy Rules, and the Composting for Community podcast. Email us at podcast@communitynets.org with your ideas for the show. Follow us on Blue Sky. Our handle is @CommunityNets. You can catch the latest research from all of our initiatives by subscribing to our monthly newsletter at ilsr.org. While you're there, please take a moment to donate. Your support in any amount helps keep us going. Unbuffered is produced by Christopher Mitchell with editing provided by me, Jordan Pittman. Until next time, thanks for listening.